Don't, John.
All right. Just want to welcome folks that are logging in. We'll start in a few minutes, and you can take a look at all the great sponsors for this Woodlot Conference that we've got on the screen. So we'll start in just a few minutes, folks. Let more people join. Just so our speakers know, we're up past 50% participants already. Just for folks who are logging in now, say welcome and thanks for joining us. We'll start in a couple of minutes. We'll just let a few more people join and then we'll get started. Well, we're up past 70 participants. That's great. We'll give it about another minute or two and then we'll get rolling, folks. All right, we're up above 80. That's great. Well, we're just afternoon, so I'll say good afternoon accurately to everyone out there in cyberspace. And thank you for joining us for the first Wednesday of 4 of the 36th annual Kemptville Winter Woodlot Conference. We've got a great lineup of speakers throughout the month of February, starting today and every other Wednesday, well, every Wednesday at noon until the end of the month. So 3 more sessions after today. I'd like to start just by thanking folks who organized this, the committee that basically put this together, led by Dorothy Hamilton, who's on the panelist screen there, and Martin Strait, and another bunch of folks from our Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry chapter of the Ontario Woodlot Association, and folks also very strongly affiliated with the Eastern Ontario Model Forest, which of course is now very much joined at the hip with the Ontario Woodlot Association. So a great coming together there. And we're keeping these great organized events going. And it's great to be here myself. I guess I should introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm John Pino, and I'm Executive Director of the Ontario Woodlot Association and the Eastern Ontario Model Forest. So I had a screenshot of folks that had sponsored the conference as everyone was logging in. I just want to put it back up for a few seconds and sincerely thank all our sponsors who, donate either cash or in kind and that sort of thing to help us make this possible. And we're hoping maybe next year we can be back in person. However, these webinars do get a lot of participation, and we're up to almost 100 people now, just shy of 100. I think with the panelists over 100, 99. And you can view the recording of this presentation and presentations afterwards on our YouTube channel. So again, thanks to our sponsors for making this possible, helping us with the Zoom webinar license and all the work that goes into it. And thanks again to the volunteers who put this great agenda together. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Martin Straight, the infamous Martin Straight, who's going to introduce our first speaker for the day.
Thank you, John. The infamous. Interesting. So our first speaker is a good friend of many of us who know Lacey Rose, R.P.F. Lacey grew up on the 53rd North Parallel in Labrador City, Newfoundland. So I actually went to a map to figure that out. Turns out it's similar to Edmonton. So I guess our Eastern Ontario winters aren't a big problem for Lacey. She graduated from the University of New Brunswick in 2006 with a Bachelor of Science in Forestry. And she's been a registered professional forester in Ontario since 2008. And for 11 years, she has been the county forester for County of Renfrew, managing the 6,500 hectares of forest owned by the county. I might add, she's been during that time an active participant in the model forest certification project the entire time, actually, as well. Renfrew is one of our certified forest partners. Outside of that role, Lacey is the co-founder of Women in Wood, a network for women who work with, in, and for the woods, and host of the web series Mighty Jobs. Lacey is a very busy person, so I really appreciate that she's taken some time to help us today to kick off the Woodlot Conference. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lacey.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And over here, so I can see. How's that? Good. Okay. All right. So exciting legislation presentation you're sitting in on today. But big disclaimer, I am not a legislation expert. I will be sharing with you things that I have come to know through necessity over the last little bit. So basically just an update on some changes to legislation that may change how you manage your land, or as a landowner or as a forestry worker on community forests or otherwise. So although, can you guys see is that better? Okay. So although we were hibernating for a couple of years, policy changes did not stand still during that time. And like I said, I'm definitely not an expert in any of these things. So I'll tell you what I've come to learn and how you can learn more if any of these subjects pique your interest as something you should know more about. So we'll be talking about butternut assessment, black ash as an endangered species, and pileated woodpecker cavities. So let's start out with a little refresher on butternut. Butternut was listed as endangered in 2008. Which means that, along with all other endangered and threatened species, it's illegal to kill, harm, harass, capture, or take an extirpated, endangered, or threatened species or destroy its habitat. And the reason that butternut was declared endangered is mostly because of butternut canker, which has been responsible for the tree's demise for the last while. So you may already know this, but if you have a butternut tree on your property or the land you manage that it will be impacted by any activity or is presenting a hazard, say hanging over your house and in a state of decline, you are required to get it assessed. I put up a clip from the Ministry of Natural Resources website about the categories of butternut trees. So there's 3 categories that are the result of the assessment. The assessor gives that assessment to the landowner, who then submits the paperwork to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which I will call MECP from now on, because that's a mouthful. And that is required to register under the conditional exemption to the Endangered Species Act for butternut. So once that's submitted, after 30 days, trees that are categorized as Category 1 trees can be destroyed. If it's a Category 2 or 3, more steps are required. But basically, Category 1 means that the tree is affected by butternut canker to such an advanced degree that retaining the tree would not support the protection or recovery of butternut trees in the area. So I just put a little shout out to, don't forget about the Forestry and Conservation Association. If you find a healthy butternut or an interesting butternut at all, they have taken major actions and are very important in supporting the recovery and conservation of butternut trees. So a great organization to know about and become engaged with. So now to the changes. There's no longer anything called the butternut health assessor. And as a butternut health assessor myself, I was surprised to learn this by accident. A landowner had sent me an email asking, what do I have to do to cut down a hazardous butternut tree next to my house? How do I find an assessor? So I started Googling, like, is there a list of butternut health assessors out there? Only to find that there is no longer such a thing as a butternut health assessor. So previously, like I said, someone had to do this assessment, and to become a butternut health assessor, you attended a course, you became certified by doing a test, and you were required to do refresher courses to maintain that certification as a butternut health assessor, which is something that you could say, like, here's my paperwork, I am a butternut health assessor. So there were some changes to the regulation in 2021, December 2021. The terminology was changed to butternut health expert. And that means that, here's the definition right from the regulation updated: an arborist, professional forester, forest technician, dendrologist, horticulturist, botanist, mycologist, or plant pathologist, or any other qualified professional who has the expertise in relation to butternut and the experience, education, training, and experience necessary to assess the health of butternut trees and carry out the other responsibilities under the rest of the regulation. So that means that if you were a butternut health assessor, and I can't say this for sure because I did not write the legislation, I'm only telling you my interpretation of it, that you're probably qualified to be an expert, but there are no longer, as far as I know, refreshers provided to help you stay sharp. You will have to go online and find the most recent forms and instructions on how to do a butternut health assessment, which are still required to follow that process. If you weren't a butternut health assessor, it'll be up to you to self-assess if you are an expert. If you're a landowner, there's not a list that you can look for an assessor, unfortunately, anymore, or a certificate that you can request for someone to say that they're qualified. Butternut trees still have to be assessed for health and removal eligibility, and all of the paperwork, submission requirements, timelines, and rules remain the same. So now we're switching gears to black ash, which I can't see the screen, but I would just like to ask if there is like a hand raising option, and maybe Martin, if you can tell me the result. How many people on this call knew or know that black ash is now an endangered species?
There's a lot of hands going up, Lacey.
Okay, well, that's good.
Not as many as they're not going up, but I'd say maybe 30%.
Okay, so then it's worthwhile to talk about this. I was going to say, oh, my work here is done. I'm done. Go have lunch. So just a refresher on black ash in general. It's a shade tolerant, medium-sized tree, really likes to have its roots wet at all times, moist, wet sites. It is really, as far as I'm concerned, a common tree in Ontario. Its range is throughout much of Ontario except the far north. Very culturally significant tree to Indigenous people who have Many communities use it for weaving. And I'm assuming everyone knows that emerald ash borer arrived in North America in 2002 and has been wreaking havoc through southern and central Ontario since then. And I can tell you from a Renfrew County perspective, it's definitely here. We still have a lot of ash that A, don't have emerald ash borer, and B, not a lot of mortality has occurred except in the more southern towns like Arnprior, Renfrew. Very, like really only in the last year have I started to see trees in the forest in those areas succumb or be infested with emerald ash borer. So as far as I'm concerned, there's still a lot of healthy ash out there, and those that are not yet infested with emerald ash borer. And I would just like to give a shout out to Martin Straight, Taylor, and Lynn, who prepared a really great information package for landowners in 2012 that you can find online. If this presentation becomes available as a PDF, all of these hyperlinks are available, but you could also just Google landowner guide for preparing for emerald ash borer. So black ash was classified as endangered by Casgrain-Robertson in their 2019-20 annual report. And in that assessment, it did say that emerald ash borer was the primary threat. However, of course, it's a very long report and lots of other things are listed in there as well. So as a result of that classification, it was listed under the Endangered Species Act in January 2022. So just over a year ago. And because for all the reasons I just talked about, it being a very common tree species, and we talked about that once something is listed as endangered, it's protected from killing, harming, harassing, or destroying its habitat. That was going to cause quite a stir of like, how is this possible? So it did receive, and this is unusual, temporary suspension of protection measures until January 2024. So although black ash is listed as endangered, the protection measures have not been put into place yet. And that's because it was recognized by the province that it is a common and widespread species, and the main threat is emerald ash borer. And also there was a lot of backlash about the potential social, economic, but also ecological impacts that this species being protected would result in. So I've got a bunch of pictures in these slides of my findings over the last few years, just as a county forester wanting to know the speed and spread of emerald ash borer. We have set traps and been involved in a number of other things, and it's definitely been fascinating and discouraging to see the spread from year to year. So listed in January, there was a number of consultation steps, and in September of 2022, a recovery strategy recommendations were put forward. And this was prepared by a consultant as recommendations and advice to the provincial government in what they should set as the protection for this species. It has not yet been accepted, but this was published for public review, and I can just give you the gist of what was recommended. It does say in the report that there's an estimation of 83 million black ash trees in Ontario. And it also recommended that a 28 meter reserve be placed on every black ash specimen and wetland that contains at least one black ash. And to be cheeky, I did some math and calculated that in a simple world, if each one of those 83 million ash received a 28 meter radial protection, that would equal 20% of Ontario's total geographic area could become regulated habitat. On top of that, you know, we've come a long way in forestry science, and in the olden days, which I will say, 80s and 90s, there was a reserve on every water body out there, which resulted in a really unrealistic new natural condition of donuts on every water body of no-cut reserves. Whereas we know that fire and windstorms don't stop 30 meters from a water body. So advancing science, research improved that direction, and now we get more realistic treatment of forests approaching water bodies. But as a forest practitioner who spends a lot of time in the forest, I would say that it would be very unusual to find a swamp, a wetland, a pond, a lake without at least one black ash around that. So if this direction was put into place, we would be back to that no-cut reserve on most of those water features and really regressing in forest science for habitat protection and enhancement. So why does this matter? For a number of reasons. Of course, the one that concerns me the most is forestry. There would be significant impacts to regular forestry activities with that kind of protection, as was recommended. It would be impossible to inventory every single tree in the forest to find every single black ash. And if it went the direction of butternut, where each one would have to be assessed and protected, from, even though we don't target black ash for harvesting, like it would be impossible to avoid incidental damage or felling, even just from making a skid trail. Plus add in the regeneration component of that, where sometimes you have a carpet of black ash regeneration. You can't even walk through an area without harming, harassing, or destroying habitat. It gets pretty complicated to even think about how you would pull that off. Also on the ecosystem front, if there is a reserve put on every black ash, that would limit the ability to improve the health of the forest ahead of or as a result of emerald ash borer infestation. So that guidance that Martin and co worked so hard on to help landowners prepare and improve the health of their forests, you would no longer be able to preemptively reduce the black ash component and encourage other species to become established. Also for roads and trails like public works, even brushing roadside where black ash is a really common species. I don't really understand or know how that would work, the process to go through to be able to do regular activities to address public safety concerns. And also on private land, I think about where you live, I'm thinking about where I live. There's a lot of wet areas here, a lot of areas that would need to have fill brought in to build a home or any kind of development, and that would definitely be impacted by this protection. So what's next? The County of Renfrew has submitted comments and concerns at all stages of consultation on this listing. I know a number of other people and organizations have done the same. The government response strategy, which will put forward what the government is proposing as protection for this species, will be posted on the Environmental Registry of Ontario sometime this winter. So probably within the next couple months. And if anything that I've talked about here today concerns you, I would recommend that you submit a comment yourself after reviewing that. And otherwise, you can still submit questions or information at any time to the website, to the email address I have on the screen there. And also just by Googling this topic, you can find a wealth of resources. So last topic, another one that took a lot of people, including myself, by surprise when I was reading the news one day and saw this National Post article about new woodpecker rules. So again, I had not heard about this, and the migratory bird regulations had already been updated. So I was surprised that it wasn't something that had been, shared around in the forestry community. This is federal legislation. The previous two I've discussed were on the provincial level. So it's not new that migratory birds are protected at all times, and all migratory bird nests are protected when they contain a live bird or viable egg. But what is new is that pileated woodpecker was added as a Schedule I bird, which means that their nests are protected when they're not occupied. So what does that mean exactly? There are other birds that were included in that Schedule I, including great blue heron and I think green heron and a whole bunch of other ones. You can also look that stuff up online. But what is new is that empty pileated woodpecker nests must be protected and monitored for 3 years and remain empty throughout before any tree with a pileated woodpecker nest cavity can be disturbed. So why does that matter? You know, that sounds logical. Like, of course, we want to protect those. They're a really important wildlife feature, but there are a lot of them out there. After I kind of heard this news, I was like thinking, how is this possible? And I was driving as a passenger in a vehicle one day and looking at the hydro poles along the road, which I know have a lot of pileated woodpecker cavities in them. And within like a couple kilometer range, I had counted 6 pileated woodpecker cavities in those hydro poles. So I can't imagine how those could be monitored for 3 years before replacing any of them. So it just is a bit of a mind stretch to figure out how this is going to all play out. So that's one. The hydro poles, also hazard trees. Of course, when people are working in the forest, safety is important. And if there is a dead tree that presents a hazard to a worker, they usually would fell that tree. Also, when roads are being built or development is being done, all trees usually are cleared. So this would add another layer to that planning. And the one that, of course, was most in my mind was, how can you possibly find and monitor every cavity in a managed forest? And of course, in the forest that we're managing and that many people are managing in central and southern Ontario, we are tree marking. And we are following the tree marking guidelines that are science-based, which are to retain 10 cavity trees per hectare and at least 25 wildlife trees in general. And of course, every time we see a pileated woodpecker nest cavity, those are the golden cavity trees, you know, you want to keep those. But is it possible to see every one? Especially if you're marking in summer when the leaves are on and you're not looking at every tree from every direction with binoculars. It's tough. And then what about operations that are not tree marked? Tree marking does not take place in every forest, and much of Ontario is managed in a different way than central Ontario. So yeah, just the logistics of how all this is possible. So I just wanted to, on the Canada.ca website about this, they do have some frequently asked questions. I just wanted to point up a couple of them because I thought the answers were interesting. So the question is, so say I find a large oval hole in a tree that looks like a pileated woodpecker habitat cavity, but it's not occupied. Is the nest cavity still protected? Can I cut it down? So the answer is, if you find one, let me see here if I make sure I get it right. They are protected year-round, including when not occupied by migratory bird or viable eggs. If you wish to destroy that unoccupied nest, you have to submit a notification through the abandoned nest registry. If the nest remains unoccupied by pileated woodpecker or other migratory bird species for 36 months, it may at that point be destroyed by cutting down the tree. So yeah, I'm not really sure how you would effectively monitor that tree for 36 months. So I'll leave that up to you to try to imagine the solution to that one. The next question was about conflicting legislation. So like I mentioned, health and safety is a big topic in the woods, and a lot of things that we have to do are to do with health and safety. So there's an example given here. For instance, in forestry operations, when a tree that is considered dangerous to a worker contains a pileated woodpecker nest cavity, you have to follow both legislations. And that would mean protecting the nest of the pileated woodpecker, and you would need to avoid it. And that might mean leaving a buffer that could be maintained around the tree within which workers could not enter. So this is just a couple of examples. The pileated woodpecker nest cavities are the perfectly round, dark looking ones because they're so deeper than the feeding cavities. And I took a picture this weekend of a feeding cavity, and I feel like pileated woodpeckers must carry around little geometry sets with them because they seem to make perfect shapes for every kind of cavity that they make, which is really cool. So when reflecting back on all of this, it seems like for a lot of things, minus the pileated woodpecker, there's a common denominator here. invasive species are increasing on the landscape. And not only are the impacts of the invasive species itself impacting forests by disrupting ecosystems, but the resulting attempt at protection is causing further impacts. So I just wonder, are there going to be similar situations that we're going to face like this for battles we're already fighting in the woods for beech bark disease? What about the other ash species? Is that going to follow? And of course, there's more invasive species on the horizon, the hemlock woolly adelgid, oak wilt. So as these trees become threatened by invasive species, which is what it's impacting them, will we be facing more and more obstacles to overcome to effectively and sustainably manage our forests? So my recommendation to you on that front is, of course, to stay informed, engage, and alert about invasive species, because at least we can try to hold them off from the forest that we're managing, and at least know when we're there to try to reduce the spread. So if you're like me and you don't just hear about these things on a day-to-day basis as they happen, and just kind of hope that you'll figure it out as you need to, how do you keep up to date on information like this? A few years ago, I signed up for notifications from the Environmental Registry of Ontario. It's really easy. You just go on the website, create an account, and select the keywords that you care about. So of course, mine are forest management, forestry, species at risk, maybe a couple other ones. But I want to know when something's changing to do with forest management. So I get email notifications whenever something is posted for review or as information on the ERO. Of course, staying connected with peers and groups like this one. And as a community forest manager, I definitely benefit a lot from the network of other forest managers like myself. And if all else fails, you stumble along and figure it out as necessary when you receive a question that requires you to give an answer. So that's all I had. John, if you could stop sharing my screen, then I might be able to see you guys again. Thank you.
Thanks, Lacey. That was an excellent presentation. I'm going to subscribe to the Environmental Registry, just like you said there. That's a great way to stay up to date. I just, we'll have a bit of time right now for a few questions if there are any, but we'll have a more general question period at the end after Sommer's presentation for both Lacey and Sommer. Are there any questions out there? I don't see any right now. You can use the Q&A and type one in, or the chat. I think people are probably just ruminating. We've got 130 participants plus the panel, so that's great. All right, well, you'll stick around, Lacey, and we can get you maybe again during the general question period after Sommer's presentation. So thanks again. It's just great. Oh, we got one. Wait a second. Chat is disabled, I believe. Well, I don't think it is. Huh. All right, let's see. Show chat previous. Well, there's a lot of questions coming in now. Okay, we'll do a few questions, maybe 3 or 4, and then we'll save the rest to the end in the general period. So from Paul, oh, right here in another room in the house, what's the restrictions on harvesting butternut?
So again, disclaimer, this is not my area of expertise. If you wish to harvest a butternut, it would have to be assessed by a butternut health expert now, not assessor, and only if it is categorized as a category 1, which means it is pretty much toast, that you would be able to cut it down. You can't just harvest a healthy butternut unless it is a hybrid or cultivated. And if there's any more questions on that one, I'm going to pass it over to a FGCA expert.
Okay. Yes, I see. Here's another one. Just someone, Joe, doesn't know what a butternut looks like. You can give a general description.
Sure. So it's got really compound leaves. Is that the right word, Martin? Yes, okay. With many leaflets. Normally, it's hard for me to describe because now I just know it as like, oh, that's unusual. Basically, if there's a tree that kind of looks like ash, but isn't, it has the same kind of furrowed bark when it's mature. It looks kind of like little canoe shapes in there. And if you notice that something is dropping its leaves early in the season, that's another indicator that there might be a butternut around. But I would recommend the best way to ID it is to either bring a plant book with you or try the iNaturalist app. So that's walnut. Yeah, there's butternut. So thanks, John.
Yeah, not helping much, probably. Yeah, there's always, I teach dendrology at Algonquin College, and there's always a lot of fun differentiating sometimes, especially in winter, between butternut and the walnut. So yeah, same genus. Okay, maybe one or two more, and then we'll get on to Sommer's presentation. I wasn't aware of any black ash on my property, but I do have some wetland. Should I go look for it?
Yeah, I would say if you have wet areas on your property, it would be likely that you would have black ash. Just I don't know where in Ontario you live, but it is a very common tree species. And the easiest way to tell between black ash and white ash is that the terminal branch and first lateral branches on black ash are black is slack. So there's a little bit of space between those two buds, the terminal and the lateral. And white is tight. So the white ash terminal and lateral buds will be touching.
Right.
Also habitat. that's the main tell.
Okay, thanks, Lacey. And we'll do one more question, and then we'll save the rest for later. Is the occupancy law only about woodpeckers, or if ducks are using the holes, would that count as occupancy? How specific does the law get?
Yeah, so any migratory bird that takes up residence in the pileated woodpecker nest cavity counts as occupied. So say a pileated woodpecker was in it 1 year, and then 2.5 years later a duck moved in, then you start the clock over on the 36 months.
Okay, right on. All right, I just wanted to show something else here before we move along. Just so you know, Lacey, we appreciate and the committee appreciates your time and the great presentation. And you'll get a copy of this wonderful book, Around the World, 80 Trees, as a gift. And I've read it. It's great. If you haven't, it's really good. I won't tell Sommer what she gets. Might be the same, might be something different. We'll see at the end.
Thanks so much,
Stay
John.
tuned.
I love tree books.
Yeah, they're great. Thanks again, Lacey. All right, and there's lots of comments, very informative, great presentation and perspective, good information. Thanks, Lacey, very informative. Hard to keep up with everything. So yeah, great job. All right, so you're off the hook for a while, Lacey, till the end, question period at the end. I'm gonna turn it over to Peter Leonhoutz now. And Peter, you might be on mute, just so you know.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great. And I'll get you to introduce our next speaker. And Peter's infamous as well. So I got two infamous
Infamous. Oh no.
infamous speaker introducers today.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Don't tell Sommer whatever you do.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you, John. So, my name is Peter Leonhoutz. I am chair of the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority Board, and our next speaker is Sommer Casgrain-Robertson, who will speak about Ontario's Bill 23 and what it will mean locally. Sommer grew up on a small farm on the St. Lawrence in Eastern Ontario, and is the 7th generation to be raised on that farm. She knows all about haying, cows, tractors, and oil changes, as well as woodlot management and waterfront living. That experience has taught Sommer that everything in the natural environment is connected, and that decisions we make today in conservation leave lasting impacts for future generations. Sommer graduated from Queen's in 2001. I believe it was political science, and then joined the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, specializing in communications. In 2013, she became the general manager. Sommer has been and remains very active in addressing provincial regulation changes regarding conservation authorities, and we couldn't have a better speaker for this topic. And without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Sommer Casgrain-Robertson. Sommer, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Peter. I'm going to steal that intro. Little humor, little fact, little embellishment. I like it. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully the slide deck comes up. So maybe just let me know if it looks good.
Yeah, looking good.
Okay, great. So as Peter mentioned, I'm going to talk today about Bill 23. Certainly, it's not as directly related to woodlot owners as the previous talk, but certainly an interesting topic for rural Ontario and landowners in general. It's a bit focused on development review and approvals, but I will kind of touch on how it affects municipalities and conservation authorities and property owners as I go through. There we go. Okay. So the first slide, I don't want to presume that people understand how development review used to work in Ontario. So this is just a slide to visually represent how development review was before Bill 23. So many of you, I'm sure, have applied for building permits in the past, and you would have gone to your municipality for a building permit. You may have also needed a septic permit, and in some areas you get that through your municipality. In other areas, you get it through the conservation authority. You may have even needed a permit from a conservation authority to undertake development on your property if you've got areas of your property that are in the floodplain or have a water course going through it, or you may be in an area with steep slopes that are unstable, or you may have a wetland on your property, which we also have regulations on. And sometimes before you can even move to the permit stage, you may need a permit from your municipality under the Planning Act, so around land use planning. So if what you want to do on your property, maybe you want to reduce the required setbacks from your lot line, or you're proposing to do something that doesn't quite conform with your municipality's official plan or zoning bylaws, may need some sort of exemption. So sometimes people apply for a severance or a zoning or official plan amendment from their municipality or minor variance. And that's considered the land use planning stage of things. And it usually precedes any sort of permits that may be required. And that is a municipal responsibility. So you apply to municipalities for planning applications, but all of those applications are circulated to conservation authorities for comments. So because conservation authorities have a niche expertise around conservation issues, we have biologists on staff, we have water resource engineers, ecologists. Municipalities circulate those applications to us, and we comment on a number of things. We will provide comments back to them on natural hazards, so issues related to flooding, erosion, wetlands. We'll also comment on any drinking water source protection issues. And we used to comment as well on natural heritage features. So sometimes valley lands, significant woodlands, and other natural features. And we would also, some conservation authorities did hydro-G reviews, which looks at groundwater, both quality and quantity. And we did stormwater management reviews, which also looked at the quality and quantity control coming out of stormwater, either management ponds or other stormwater type runoff features. So the focus, you may have seen a lot of press coverage on Bill 23. It was dominating the news this past fall. It was introduced in October, the day after the municipal election, and it had a very brief comment period of just about a month. There was some extensions to the end of the year on some components. And it really focused on the three areas that I have circled. So when you look at the development review process in general, a lot of the comments or a lot of the content in Bill 23 looked at the land use planning role of municipalities. It looked at the commenting role of conservation authorities, and it also looked at the permitting role of conservation authorities. So Lacey had mentioned the Environmental Registry of Ontario. It is a great place for information to do with legislative changes. So there was the Bill 23 itself that came out, but there were also a lot of other associated postings that came out. I know in total we commented on 4 different postings. So there was a lot of material for municipalities and the public and conservation authorities to really absorb and wrap their head around and to provide comments back on. So I'm not going to touch too much today on impacts to the municipal role. There have been a lot. You've probably seen headlines about changes to the process. So how certain types of land use planning approvals get processed. There's been changes to the public role. So there's been some removal of when and where the public can comment on certain types of applications. There's been changes to development charges that municipalities can charge. So that's a whole presentation unto itself. But what I'm going to focus on is the 2 bottom ones. So changes to the commenting role that conservation authorities have that supports municipal land use planning, and then also some potential changes to the conservation authorities permitting role. So there is one change that took effect on January 1st. So there was a regulation that was introduced on December 28th, and we all got a letter at the end of the year, basically saying this regulation was introduced, and it took effect 3 days later on January 1st. So municipalities and conservation authorities were both notified. And what it did is it limited the scope of comments that a conservation authority can now provide to municipalities on planning applications. So we're still required to be circulated all planning applications for our review, but we now have to limit our comments to natural hazards and to drinking water source protection. So what it means is when we're commenting now on natural heritage features, it can only be in relation to how it impacts flooding or erosion or unstable soils. So if you take wetlands, for example, we can continue to review the implication that a Planning Act application would have on a wetland, but only in how it relates to the function of the wetland and impacts on water levels and flood control. So we can no longer comment on how that development proposal may impact the ecological features of the wetland or say the water quality aspects of that wetland feature. Same with stormwater management. We will continue to review stormwater management proposals, but only when it comes to water quantity. So how much water is being released and the effect on the receiving body in terms of water levels or any erosion impacts. We won't be able to comment on the water quality side of things. And then we're no longer able to provide hydro-G reviews in any circumstances. So those are changes that are in effect right away. It's causing a certain amount of chaos in the development review system just because there was no transition period. So the regulation that came out on December 28th certainly caught municipalities and conservation authorities off guard. We were hoping and expecting a transition period, which is fairly normal when legislative changes are introduced. So municipalities are really scrambling to figure out how they take over this review function that has been done for decades by their local conservation authorities. So most municipalities we've spoken to are looking at using consultants to farm out these reviews to. And there is concerns being expressed by the municipalities that these reviews could now be more expensive and take longer if they're having to go to the consulting sector for this function. So there is some concern about what the impact of these changes will be on applicants, both with timelines and the cost. So this slide is actually my last slide. I wanted to look ahead. So there was a lot in Bill 23 that hasn't taken effect yet. So the previous slide is what change has occurred as of January 1st. There was a lot of information in Bill 23 and those other environmental registry postings that I spoke about in the fall that we provided comments back on. So one is the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. So one of the documents that they posted last fall for consultation was the commonly called OWES manual, so OWES manual. And it's really a document that's issued by MNRF about how wetlands are evaluated in Ontario. And they essentially edited and made a lot of changes to that document. It is also now in effect. So it took effect January 1st. And some of the implications of the new manual is that you can no longer complex wetlands. So traditionally, if there were many wetlands close together in an area, there was a recognition that those wetlands really functioned as a single unit, and that there was habitat linkages between the wetland pockets, that there was a hydrologic connection between those wetlands. And so they were evaluated and scored as a whole. Now, the new manual says that you evaluate individual pockets of wetlands on their own merit, and you can't complex them with wetlands that may be in close proximity. They've also removed the scoring that went into the evaluation that looked at endangered or threatened species. So wetlands were also often ranked highly when it came to habitat features. So that's been removed from the scoring. And so the result, especially in Eastern Ontario, where we have so many wetlands, I know the Rideau watershed, it's 20% of our watershed is wetlands. So we have a lot of wetland features in Eastern Ontario. We know the positive impact they have on improving water quality. They act as filters, essentially. They remove a lot of contaminants from water as they flow through wetlands. But also for us, wetlands are essential to flood mitigation and drought mitigation. So we know that wetlands just in the Rideau watershed alone reduce the peak flood by 10%. So wetlands are essential. They're like sponges, they soak up water during high flow and hold it. So it reduces water levels during a flood, and then they release that water very slowly over time when we're into more of a low flow situation. So they're helpful in staving off and mitigating drought periods. So we are concerned that under this new wetland evaluation system, that it's going to be a lot more difficult for wetlands to be ranked and evaluated as provincially significant, which really provides the highest level of protection for wetlands. Under the new system, there was also consultation last fall on an offsetting regime. So the province is looking to create a provincial policy where wetlands would be able to be damaged or removed, and you would offset the impacts of that somewhere else by undertaking a wetland enhancement or wetland creation project somewhere else. We are also concerned about that. We recognize there's a place for offsetting, but there's a lot of challenges in trying to replicate the complex functions of a naturally occurring wetland, that you really can't replicate a natural wetland. So we are concerned about what that policy may look like when it's written. And MNRF used to be responsible for evaluating wetlands, and also if somebody wanted to hire a wetland evaluator, that information was submitted to the ministry for review and approval. They are no longer going to undertake that function. So it's now being downloaded as a municipal responsibility. So individual landowners will hire a wetland evaluator, and that information will be submitted to the municipality for consideration. So a lot of changes around how wetlands are evaluated, and a lot of unanswered questions about what that may mean. We're also expecting a new provincial policy statement this year. So this is really an overarching provincial document that sets the rules for municipalities. So municipalities, when they write their official plan, it has to conform to the PPS, same with their zoning. So this is really the framework for how land use planning will be undertaken in Ontario. So we'll closely be watching what the new provincial policy statement says later this year. And they also did a lot of consultation last fall on the regulation that governs the permits that conservation authorities issue for development in floodplain, along water courses, and adjacent to wetlands. Some of what they proposed in the fall, and none of these changes are in effect yet, but this was in the consultation document that was released last fall. So what the province was proposing and seeking feedback on was potentially exempting development that had been authorized under the Planning Act from requiring a permit from the Conservation Authority. And this would only be in select municipalities. They're looking at streamlining approval for certain low risk activities or going as far as exempting them from needing a permit from a conservation authority. Looking at removing the conservation of land and control of pollution as two of the tests that we use when deciding whether or not a permit should be issued for development. Looking to update the watercourse definition and going from a depression where water flows to a defined bank or channel. Looking at reducing the area that's regulated around wetlands and reducing it from 120 meters to 30 meters. And then potentially limiting the types of conditions that conservation authorities can attach to permits. So our concern with some of these proposals in general is it's going to reduce the amount of area where we regulate development and what the impact may be on flood control. Really, the purpose of our regulation is to make sure that development doesn't have a negative impact on flooding upstream or downstream from where it's being proposed, but also no impact on erosion, and also no impact on wetlands or watercourses. So we are concerned that by reducing the scope of our permits or reducing where they apply, we may start to see increased flooding conditions, increased erosion, or negative impacts on wetlands. So I'll leave it there. Obviously, lots to consider, lots of changes in our world as a conservation authority. We've had a lot to absorb and adjust to over the last couple of years. And I think there's lots more to come in terms of other changes. So we're just really trying to stay on top of it, provide comments back to the province, work with our municipal partners, because a lot of this also impacts them and what we're able to do for them. Conservation authorities and municipalities are a really strong partnership, and we really do work in lockstep. So changes to one often impacts the other. But hopefully that gives you a taste for what is changing on the landscape and how it might relate to you as an individual landowner. And certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Sommer. That was excellent. Very informative presentations by both you and Lacey today. I'm learning a lot. And we have a couple of questions here right off the bat. We'll get into those, I think, and then we'll open it up to more general questions. There's a few Lacey still has to answer. Someone asked, who makes the call on fish habitat?
So it used to be and still is Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So fish habitat is really a federal jurisdiction. There was for a number of years agreements between conservation authorities and DFO, where conservation authorities, just because we work at the local level, were able to assess and issue permits on behalf of DFO whenever there was the potential for destruction or damage to fish habitat. There was some changes a number of years ago that removed us from that role, which was too bad because we were able to do it more quickly since we're at the local level. So now we were also covering it off to a certain extent in some of our permit reviews under the control of pollution aspect of what we do. And we were also commenting on it under the Planning Act as part of kind of the scope of comments we would give to municipalities. But certainly now moving forward, that reduced scope on planning comments, we won't be able to comment on really habitat of any sort, whether it's upland or aquatic habitat. And if they pull the control of pollution test out of our permits, then really we'll have to be silent in our permits as well when it comes to fish habitat. So that will revert back to an entirely federal responsibility.
Right on. Thanks, Sommer. And here's another question. When do you think the new Section 28 regs will be finalized?
That's a great question. So we're hearing that the provincial policy statement, this is all, of course, rumor and secondhand information, but we're hearing the provincial policy statement is done essentially. So we're expecting that shortly, probably by the spring at the latest, but that is all speculation. I would expect we may see the Section 28 regulation along a similar timeline, although I don't know. So I know we're kind of anxious to see it just one way or another so that we can just adjust and have that bigger picture of what our mandate's going to look like moving forward. But the province has to date been silent, so there's no timeline coming from them. But I
Personally, I would be surprised if we didn't see an updated Section 28 regulation probably by the spring or early summer is what I would expect.
Thanks. And here's another one. Were these changes made known prior to the last provincial election?
I would put them into two categories. So some of the aspects of the Section 28 regulation, in fairness, did show up in prior years in some of the consultation documents that the province had released. So if you look back to, I think, 2019, there's been a number of changes to the Conservation Authorities Act over the last couple of years. We're on, I'm not sure if it's version number 3, maybe over the last.
Was summer frozen for other folks? Yeah, okay. I don't know if you can hear Summer, but you're frozen. Maybe turn off your video and that might help. It was a good answer. Hopefully we'll be able to get her back. We'll just give her a second here. Maybe we can answer a couple of your questions in the meantime while Summer gets back on. Lacey, is that okay?
Sure, I'll
Yeah.
answer what I can and tell how to find the answer if I don't know it.
One question is, how do you identify a hybrid?
I'll tell you what I do. I call the FGCA. I don't see enough butternut native ones or hybrids to be able to make that distinction. It's really difficult. So honestly, if there's ever a question for me, I start by looking up the resources online that the FGCA has put on their website, which are amazing. And if it's a really contentious necessity for an answer, I'll get somebody who knows more about it than me to come out in the field. They look really similar, so it would be hard to describe the differences verbally without looking at the resources.
I've actually got a meeting with Carrie McClaven, that group, on Friday on my way
Superstar.
home.
Harry.
Great stuff. I don't know if Summer's back yet or not. No, okay. We can do another question for you then, Lacey. This one, how are the people involved in making new regs so out of touch with reality on the ground and in the forest? What can we do about this? That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Yeah, I would say become employed in the policy world. If you are someone who knows about on the ground, that would be a great way to get some diverse knowledge in there. But most of all, any person can be involved in the consultation process. That is the way that I try to make my knowledge and opinions heard, is by submitting comments at every stage of consultation when it comes to things that are going to impact the work that we do.
Yeah, I know with the OWA and the OMF, we try to offer constructive suggestions and solutions than you know, what sometimes comes down as draconian sort of rules and regulations, and sometimes that helps. I know a lot of other folks like to do that too, and try to, you know, suggest alternatives and different ideas and approaches. It's a constant battle. So just another question here on the conflict between federal and provincial regulations for the pileated woodpecker nests. I think the worker safety issue might trump the federal regulation. I don't think the federal regulation would be applied if it was material impediment to logging work generally. This is a complicated legal question.
Yeah, and I had up there on the screen what is on the Canada.ca in response to that exact question. So that's a more complicated legal matter than I can
Yeah.
answer, but in their answer, they said that no, leave a buffer.
Yeah, that's what you have to do.
Mhm.
So I don't see Sommer back here yet. I think we lost, oh, wait, she is there. I don't know if you can hear us, Sommer. We might be out of luck for hearing her anymore.
I'm back. Sorry,
Oh, you're back. Okay.
my internet cut out. Don't know why. It's a beautiful sunny day, but apologies for that. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, maybe turn off your video, Sommer, and that might help.
Yes.
I know we'd
Yeah,
like
I
to
think
see your
that could have
smiling
been part
face,
of it.
but we'll just have to forego that. So
Sorry about that.
No.
So anyway, long story short, changes were in prior documents to the election, but a lot of the changes in Bill 23 were a surprise. So no, they weren't known prior to the election.
yeah, okay. And here's another one for you, Sommer. Will the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority redo the load plain mapping if removal of wetlands will increase peak flows, especially downstream in Ottawa, where there are numerous houses that were not in the floodplain under historic conditions? That's floodplain mapping, sorry. Autocorrect, okay.
Yes. Yeah, sure. So it will be interesting. When we do floodplain mapping, we use watershed modeling, like hydraulic modeling, and land cover plays a big part of that. So certainly wetlands and wetland cover is part of the modeling that really drives where the floodplain boundaries are delineated. So if we were to see, widespread loss of wetlands, then that will definitely have an impact on floodplain lines in the future. We don't redraw floodplain lines frequently. We tend to redraw when they're 15, 20, 25 years old. It depends on how many changes there's been in that particular stretch of the watershed. But yeah, you're absolutely right. As we come back around to some of those studies and we start to update them, we would see a change in the floodplain boundary due to any wetland loss.
Right on. Okay, thanks. And I think we're just about finished with the questions, but we have a comment here, and it's from Heather at Forestry and Conservation Association. Hi, Heather. See you on Friday in Barrie. Hi, just FYI, we'll be doing a couple of BHE workshops in June. No accreditations since that isn't required or available anymore, but all of the good info and more re-regs and methodology for assessing butternut, including hybrid ID. If you are interested, you can keep an eye out on the Forestry and Conservation Association website or contact us to get on the contact list for this course. That's great. Great info, Heather. That's good stuff. So good advice from Lacey to consult you guys. So that's good. Well, that's just great. I think I don't see any more questions or comments. I just wanted to share my screen one more time. And surprise, surprise. Here's what Sommer gets. It's the same book Lacey got, Around the World in 80 Trees, and it is a great read. So thanks again, Sommer and Lacey, for great presentations. Did I hear someone try to say something there? No? Okay.
Yeah, hi, John. It's Peter Leanhouse.
Yeah.
I didn't, I put my hand up, but I guess you can't see it. And I was just going to make a comment that just for reference, because I realize that we have, members attending from all across Ontario. And each conservation authority has a limited zone, which is in their watershed. And just for everybody's interest, there are lots of areas that are outside of conservation authorities. So what Sommer represents is, our particular picture for Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, but each watershed does they apply the same regulations, but they might have a different implementation.
Yeah.
Worth looking into.
Yeah, well, right on.
That's all. Thanks. Bye.
Well, thanks, Peter. That's great. I'm just gonna one more time thank our many sponsors for their generous support of the the Kemptville Winter Woodlot Conference, again, the 36th annual Woodlot Conference. And again, thank our presenters today, Lacey and Sommer. Thank our introducers, Martin and Peter. Thank Dorothy and all the committee members that helped organize this. And don't forget, next Wednesday is the second of 4 sessions. It'll be noon to 1 p.m. roughly again, certainly starting at noon. And it'll be Ken Elliott speaking on managing woodlots for birds. So that should be pretty interesting. Just want to say thanks to everyone who joined us today. We topped out at over 130. I think we hit the 132 mark, which is pretty impressive. And Sommer says, thank you so much for the book. I'm a woodlot lover at heart, so that's great. Well, I think we got a great series kickoff today, and more good stuff to come. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next Wednesday at noon.